Despite its wealth deriving from fossil fuels, Norway is the crown jewel of Europe's transition to electrification. Last year, over 50% of cars sold in Norway were electric, and in December of 2020 that number rose further to nearly 70%. So despite a Europe-wide push for an end to fossil fuel vehicle sales within the next 15 years, it's no surprise that for automakers wanting to get a piece of the EV action, Norway is the place to set up base camp. And in Oslo, just a few streets away from the Radhuset, home of the Nobel Peace Prize ceremony every December, you'll find a Polestar showroom. Polestar is of course kin to Volvo, and their parent company, the Chinese automotive firm Geely. With Volvo's Scandi heritage and close ties between both brands, Polestar's strong presence in Norway, and in Europe as a whole, is unsurprising. But parent company Geely aren't alone in their aspirations for the European market. Sure, China is clearly the largest car market in the world. A staggering 25 million cars were sold there in 2019. But while the US market is larger than Europe's, it's not by much, with fewer than 2 million car sales separating them. Add to that there's a lot more regulatory standardization between Japan, Australia, Korea, Russia, the United Kingdom and the European Union than between the US, China and Europe, and you'll find that homologation in Europe is like a practice run for a bunch of other smaller markets. Markets in which experience with Europe should mean the type approval process is much smoother. Getting a piece of the European market pie has long been part of non-European automaker plans, and it's always been a challenge. The majority of Europeans, to paint with very broad strokes, have an interesting relationship with vehicles compared to the majority of Americans, at least that I've encountered. It's a combination of the car is a tool and should be used as such, and the car is an object to enjoy aesthetically. So interior volume should be used to transport whatever is required, from running garden waste to the tip, to moving house, to DIY equipment, to transporting bunting for school sports day. And if it won't fit in the car, on with the roof rack. If that won't take it, and bear in mind I once carried a tumble dryer on top of the Miner, tow hitches. The car should stand up to that abuse. I've seen plenty of Mercedes doing duty hauling stuff on a farm, and I've seen quite a few exhausted Luxo barges rotting in the bushes there too. So while functionality is vital, there's also a requirement that the car should be beautiful. It should be aesthetically pleasing, it should be pretty, it should bring some hygge into your life. It's at turns a dichotomy and a fusion, which I suppose is all to say we're a bit of a picky bunch. But just like the US, there's also a long history of being very wary of imports. Companies from outside the continent have to contend with the challenge of both being potentially unknown and viewed with suspicion, and at times derision. Back in the 60s and 70s, when Nissan, Toyota and Honda moved into the European market, they had to fight to be recognised and respected. Now, when these automakers first made their market introduction, there were no doubt some quality issues. But to be brutally honest, my family's first new car, a Ford Escort, rolled out from the factory with the letters FOFD proudly emblazoned on the trunk lid. Our 1980s Fiat sported a laundry list of faults 2 full sheets of paper long, which is impressive for a car with so few features. And of course, who can forget British Leyland and its quality control issues? Although some might want to. And that same situation has arisen with Korean automakers. Kia and Hyundai both have worked hard for years to overcome the xenophobia of not being a domestic automaker and the challenge of not getting it right quality-wise at launch. Once you're tarred with the brush of poor craftsmanship, you can win all the JD Power Awards for quality you like. It's going to take a good few years to get over that. And not every brand manages to do so. Yugo, of course, being one of my favourites since the first car I owned and drove daily. Not the first car I owned, mind. Was a deeply unreliable Yugo 45A. A car I spent as much time repairing as I did driving. And while I fondly remember it, I'm kind of Stockholm syndromed about the Yugo. Zastava was far from alone. while cars from former communist countries certainly had a reputation for different standards of quality control, and possibly a largely deserved one, cars from other new markets have also struggled with meeting European expectations. Daewoo, now part of GM, failed to overcome early quality issues, and no matter how long it made the warranty and how it covered in-use costs, it couldn't shift units. Even winning Car of the Year 3 times with the Matiz didn't fix its image problem. I literally tapped their name into the team chat yesterday and was rewarded with, "They were terrible!" And although all of that said, the rebadged Matiz, actually, it hides below the Chevrolet Spark label in the US, and it seems to sell fairly consistently. And that was, of course, the basis for GM's compliance Spark EV, a surprisingly good precursor to the Bolt. For every Toyota, Kia and Nissan, there's another Yugo, FSO and Daewoo. So as we watch Chinese automakers making their entrance into new markets, the importance of getting it right at the beginning is very apparent. One of China's other European market entrants, Great Wall, certainly made a splash with their crash tests. Unfortunately, the splash it made was 0 stars on the global NCAP tests. While those tests weren't on the European model, which has enhanced crash safety features, such a spectacularly terrible video, along with their reportedly lackluster performance and handling, no doubt contributed to a car sales base report which indicated they'd sold a total of 370 cars across the whole of Europe last year, and that despite being incredibly cheap. In Europe at least, being cheap doesn't necessarily mean being bought. Which brings us to Nio. We've been watching Nio for a while, both for its entrance to the European market and its early work on entering the US market, and it certainly seems like it's going about this in a completely different way to many of its earlier competitors. Rather than try and take on the extremely competitive lower end of the market, it's taken its Chinese market formula, which led to 157% growth in sales in 2019, and then, pandemic notwithstanding, 108% sales growth in the last year, and are attempting to meld that with European attitudes to create a winning formula for the European market. Granted, in volume, Nio isn't big, but it does seem to be building a solid base in China. But while this month Nio announced that it has received European whole vehicle type approval for the ES8, meaning that across Europe and in Norway the vehicle can be sold, it still has a hard road ahead. Nio is looking to sell into a particularly demanding market. The ES8 is another luxury SUV in a segment which is already crowded, and in a market which expects a hell of a lot from cars. But if Nio is able to pull this off, the ES8 could help push electrification and autonomy within the European Union and in those other closely associated countries like Norway. The Nio family heavily pushes autonomy, with a system that is closer in functionality to Ford's Blue Cruise or GM's Super Cruise than Tesla's full self-driving. Combining mapping technology with a raft of high-resolution cameras and LiDAR sensors along with radar, ultrasonic sensors and AI-based autonomous decision-making, in China the system can operate hands-off, from on-ramp to off-ramp, but it is also geo-restricted. That said, it advertises that it is available on most Chinese highways and urban expressways, something that certainly can't be said for GM or Ford's offerings in the US. How much of that driver assistance will be available at the launch of the ES8 in the EU is still a little hazy, but like Tesla, it offers OTA updates to the car's firmware and has made significant improvements to functionality. Although Nio did manage to strand a driver who attempted an OTA update while driving back in 2019. Something I'm going to assume that it's fixed since. As an aside, Nio recently announced that it's working with Nvidia to bring level 4 autonomy, which is about the point when autonomy is actually autonomous, to its next platform using the Nvidia Orin processors. This is a switch from development so far which has been using the Intel Mobileye platform. The other interesting thing about Nio's Navigate on Pilot autonomy package is that it's provided as a subscription service. As we've said on the channel before, automakers are looking for other ways to monetize their consumers, and features as a subscription is something we're expecting to see more of. Indeed, it's something that we talked about back in 2019 after countless your car as a living room presentations at CES. Features as a subscription do make sense for self-driving. Need to drive across the country or do a long summer road trip? Just pay for it in the time you need. But it also contributes to something we're not terribly fond of here. The physical object which you don't exactly own, nor have the rights to tinker with or repair. In other ways, the ES8 technology and specification is definitely sitting in a place where it can comfortably compete with other vehicles in its segment. A stoplight sprint of 4.9 seconds compares reasonably well with the previous Model X, which hit it in about 4.4 seconds. Not so well with the current variant, but it's certainly respectable. And all-wheel drive from 400 kilowatt dual motors is reasonable, if not stunning, given other automakers' specs. But then Nio is very much marketing based on comfort, not speed. The range is one area where the ES8 is not exactly winning awards. With an advertised WLTP range of 580 kilometers, that's roughly 360 miles, which we'd expect to translate into a usable range of around 270 miles. From its 100 kilowatt hour battery, it's not going to win any range or efficiency awards, but that brings us to one of the most interesting aspects of Nio's European market entrance. Nio has also announced that it plans to bring its battery swapping technology to Europe, a system that reportedly operates at 135 sites in China already and, as of May last year, had passed 500,000 battery swaps. Unlike in a lot of markets in densely populated areas, like the majority of Western Europe, battery swapping may make sense even when it's limited to one manufacturer. We've seen several companies attempt this and fail, but maybe with enough sites and along major routes it could be something that makes smaller batteries more usable, something which definitely helps given the current struggle to obtain enough batteries, and which helps reduce the environmental footprint of these vehicles. Nio certainly seems to believe that it has this worked out. I'm still somewhat skeptical on this front because as charge times for EVs continue to decrease, the return on this technology seems likely to reduce outside of fleet management, where it definitely could serve a useful purpose. But Nio's ES8 is unlikely to be a big fleet seller. However, if it brings the smaller EC6 to Europe, that might change. The final thing, which is interesting just for seeing how Nio is working to engage with the culture of the market it's entering, is the Nio House. The Nio showroom, overlooking the Rathuset and just a few streets from Polestar, is intended to be more than a showroom. It's what Nio calls a lifestyle location, with spaces people can rent for meetings, spaces to sit and read, a cafe, a children's play area, and forums where it intends to host speakers. It's a multi-function space that it's hoping will bring some comfortable hygge to its newest customer base. Oh, and we haven't even got to the little virtual assistant that every Nio sports, which is very cute, but I've not really seen any videos of it in action outside China, so that will have to wait. But it's certainly different. So what does all this mean? Nio is entering the market at a moment when a large number of legacy automakers have finally been dragged kicking and screaming into producing EVs. At a moment when it's becoming clear that the hopes automakers had for a long tailpipe on fossil fuel vehicle sales in Europe are being dashed, and at a moment when the European courts are beginning to require companies and governments to tackle anthropogenic climate change. Some of these factors play in Nio's favour and some against. Will their market entrance be a success? I think it partly depends on just how good those first vehicles rolling off the ships are. But it's going to be exciting to watch. That's it for today. Please do hit subscribe and the bell if you haven't, as it stops YouTube from doing weird things with our content. And make sure you're subscribed to Transport Evolved Take 2 and Transport Evolved Shorts. There are links below. Thanks on behalf of the entire TE crew go out to the folks on my right for being our $15 to $49 a month patrons. Special thanks to our $50 a month patrons Andrew Martin, Guido Drahoa, Brophy Wolf, Anonymous Freak, Raging Fellows, Kyle Hodgson, Gordon C., Paul Conway, Laura Sanborn, Anthony Coates, Denny Hyde, Sean Ueda and Tesla in the Gong, and our deepest gratitude to our $100 a month Patreon supporters John Lyons, Marcel Ward, Reggie Watts, JP Fagerback, Will Graylan and Ian. If you'd like to join the ranks of wonderful supporters, you'll find links below to Patreon, Bitcoin and Ko-fi. Chat with the team and TE fans over at Discord, and if you'd like to buy some TE swag, just head on over to our Redbubble store. Our new Pride designs, like this one, are now in stock, and all proceeds from this month go to the Trevor Project. Thanks for joining me, and as always, keep evolving!